You're listening to Taking Stock with Pimm Fox and Kathleen Hayes on Bloomberg Radio.
I'm Pimm Fox, along with Kathleen Hayes. We are broadcasting live from the CUNY, the Graduate Center in Midtown Manhattan, really almost in the shadow of J.P. Morgan's home, right over on 36th Street. I was noting that as I was coming over here today.
J.P. Morgan Library.
Yes, yeah. And I want to introduce our special guest. Joining us now is Janet Gornick. Janet is the director of the Luxembourg Income Study Center. Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you.
Having us here. What exactly is the mission of the Luxembourg Income Study Center?
Okay.
Or LIS.
First of all, it's a pleasure to be here. Let me first explain that the Luxembourg Income Study is actually an institution. It's a small research center and data archive, and it's located in the country of Luxembourg, which we'll come back to for a moment. And it's been there since 1983, developing a big database and making those data available. I am the director of the Institute in Luxembourg, and I opened a satellite office here at the Graduate Center at CUNY, which is where I'm a professor. So here we do teaching and research. Over there we actually produce the data.
And this is unique in that there's lots of people, lots of governments collect this data, but the extent of the data you have, the kind of data you have is unparalleled, as I understand it.
Yes, that's right. And what we have, there's one key word, and that word is microdata. So what we gather and make available are microdata, and that means that for all of the countries that are in LIS, now it's just about 50 countries, we have data sets at various points in time, and microdata means that there are actually data available at the level of persons and households. So in other words, there may be 10,000 or 20,000 or 30,000 records, and that means that when people use our data, as we make available to researchers, they can do very fine-grained studies looking at subgroups that they're interested in, doing distributional research, doing a lot of very fine statistical research. And I think, Kathleen, what you're referring to is something I've said in the past. If you go to other international organizations, the OECD, the World Bank, the ILO, you can get excellent national statistics, but it's pretty much only we who make available the microdata.
And there, one way to describe it is cross-national comparative searches. This is also a characteristic. Explain what that is.
Yes, definitely. So what we've done since we began in 1983 with 6 countries, and here we are now all these years later with just about 50 countries. We've just added them one after the next as we've grown. So we bring in data sets from all of these countries at various intervals. It used to be each 5 years, and then 4 years, and then 3. So indeed, people use our research to study socioeconomic outcomes, in particular poverty and inequality and labor market outcomes across countries and over time. And the cross-national variation opens up this enormous opportunity to understand the role of institutions and policies in shaping these outcomes.
When I came down to your press conference last week, you talked a lot about something I'd never thought about. And when you said it, light bulb went on in my head. Harmonization. In other words, lots of countries, they measure things differently. They do their series differently. They have different time periods. And if you want to do comparisons and understand better how this dynamic works globally, you need to harmonize the data. How do you do that? How do you compare, poverty or wealth in Pakistan versus Canada?
Right, exactly. Well, that's exactly right. So the core of the work that we do, the value added, the intellectual work, is what's called data harmonization. So we have a team of professionals, about 6 in Luxembourg. They're statisticians and data experts. And what they do when they bring these data sets in is they go through every piece of information one at a time, essentially, and they recode it. In other words, they move it into the common variable list or the common template that we've created so that each source of income is rendered comparable across countries. It's very painstaking. It's very technical. We spend about 8 weeks on each data set, and it's sort of unsung heroic work, I would say. It's not very, I hate to say this because it's such a trendy term, it's not very sexy, but it's absolutely needed, and that's what our team is doing. And I will say immodestly, we're pretty much recognized as the most expert in data harmonization in the world.
Well, when you mentioned harmonization, it made me recall a conversation that you were having yesterday, Kathleen, with Tracy Jordal of PIMCO, because she was talking about harmonization of financial rules and regulations, this idea that it
between
works,
Europe and the U.S., yeah.
Exactly. Speak, if you can, a little bit on the role of inequality, because that's something that obviously connects with this idea that there's no harmonization.
Well, actually, I think I would put it this way, that what we do is we harmonize the income data from these very different surveys into a common format so that when you study income inequality across countries, you're studying the same phenomenon. So, you hear a great deal about in the U.S. that income inequality has risen or the top has risen. There are always detractors saying if you measure it this way, it's not really rising. If you measure it that way, if you include capital gains, it does this or that. That's the point of what we do, is we render these income definitions identical as much as possible across countries so that when we tell you what U.S. in particular income inequality looks like, say compared to other countries, we feel very confident that you're measuring the same kind of inequality. Otherwise, people are really very doubtful about these kinds of findings.
Are you gratified, encouraged that people like Paul Krugman have also taken up this challenge of understanding this, that our latest Nobel Prize winner has written about the problem of poverty and income inequality? Do you feel like there's a tide turning here, that people are more focused now?
I think the word I would use is exhilarated. Yes, we're thrilled at LIS. I must say, those of us who've been working with LIS, I've been working with LIS for 26 years, have been studying poverty and income inequality for all of those years, and for most of those years in quiet, with very little attention paid outside of academia. And things changed radically in the last 5 years as a result of, I think, the Occupy movement, which inserted the word inequality into world conversation, the crisis and the recession, and those of us in the field are amazed and thrilled at all of the attention that we're now getting.
Janet Gornick, Director of Luxembourg Income Studies Center in New York, here at the Graduate Center at CUNY, Midtown Manhattan.